But yeah, on with the show today, ladies and gentlemen. It's a little bit of a preamble to get us into today. First things first, I wanted to go over, ladies and gentlemen. There's been a lot of news headlines that have been breaking, a lot of stuff we've got to go over. Biggest things which seem to be making the rounds at the moment, particularly with regards to the lefties on X at the moment. There's a story which we need to go over that they have really latched onto, right? And I've been trying to point at it, being like, oh, look, the right don't care when these things are the wrong race and the wrong place and whatever else, when obviously we do. The vast majority of people, regardless of political persuasion, will be against all forms of child sexual exploitation and abuse. Now, we've seen that some people, for various reasons, have wanted to cover up certain elements of that, whether it's for racial reasons, whether it's for political reasons, whatever it may be, whether it be for grievances against the British people. The rape of Britain is a reality. It is just a reality, unfortunately. But what's happened recently, the story that a lot of the lefties in particular have really latched onto, I'm just going to move my webcam slightly over so that I can, there we go, I'm a little bit more centered now. There we are. Story that they've latched onto at the moment is that Kent police have recently announced that they have sent multiple child sexual offenders, 8 in total, down for a period, combined total, of 100 years. Right, so I'll play you the video in the background for you now, ladies and gentlemen, so you can see some of the things that have been again breaking in the news cycle, so to speak. So you see here, 8 child sex offenders have been jailed for 100 years. You have one here, Roy Humphreys was sentenced to 22 years imprisonment. Right, so I'll let the video play and we'll go through all of these. Stephen Riley was sentenced to 19 years imprisonment. We'll break down all the details in a little bit. Glenn Swanson sentenced to 18 years. Then you have George Payne Woodham was sentenced to 16 years imprisonment. So you have a wide age range of these convicted, ladies and gentlemen. Lee Balsham was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. Lucifer Hunter was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. What kind of parent names their kid Lucifer? And then Kevin Scarnell was sentenced to 2 years, 8 months imprisonment. And I believe this is the last one. Andrew Cullis was sentenced to 2 years and 4 months imprisonment. Now, obviously, all of these have been sent down at the same time. And I think many of us got the misconception, and the lefties have jumped all over it, that this was a gang of sorts. This was an example of a white child sexual exploitation and rape gang. And obviously they jumped all over it, where the people, they're just racist. They don't want to report on this. Well, it's important that we report on it, right? And we shouldn't be afraid of reporting on this stuff, because we stand against all forms of degeneracy like this, especially when children are involved, right? Especially when you have child victims. Now, the one misconception that I initially got is that this is not actually a gang in and of itself. So there's one bit of separation. These are not the same issues as to what we have seen with the systematic and racially and religiously motivated systematic operation targeting specifically, for the most part, British children that predominantly Pakistani Muslim men were engaging in, and the communities covered for it. Families and communities protected the people that were doing this. They tried to shield themselves from being prosecuted, so to speak. And we've seen all instances of clips. I believe there's one outside Rochdale police station where they went and rioted after one of their community got apprehended for, I'm not saying it's to do with these issues in particular, right? But one of them got apprehended and brought to the police station for a crime. And not long after, they were released because they were about to riot outside the police station. They were throwing all manner of things at the police station. They were trying to kick the doors down, all manner of stuff, right? So we've seen police weakness. All of these other things have just further emboldened these problems. But it's good to see, no matter who it is, no matter where they're from, the child sexual predators are getting sent down. Now, let's break down some of these cases, shall we? So, as I mentioned, you have 8 people that have been sent down in all. And a lot of it, or at least with regards to one of them have gone to prison. Roy Humphreys was 82 years old when he was found guilty, right? So all of his crimes are in the past. I actually got Grok to break down them all for me. But on the Kent Police website, which you can find this link down below as well, Roy Humphreys, for example, there was physical abuse involved, obviously, abusing 2 boys in the 1970s and another in the 2000s. He was found guilty at Maidstone Crown Court, and on 15th of October was sentenced to 22 years. So odds are he's going to die in prison, okay? And nobody's going to miss him. Let's make no mistake about it. Nobody is going to miss him. Stephen Riley, or Stephen Riley, not sure to pronounce it, was found guilty of using threats of violence to silence and maintain control over a victim for nearly 2 decades, starting in the early 2000s, so presumably that will be up to the modern day. On Thursday, the 16th of October 2025, the 63-year-old was sentenced to 19 years imprisonment and will serve an additional 3 years on license, assuming he makes it to the point where he is eligible for his release. Now, I don't know, with what we've seen seemingly with the justice system in this country, where they're losing prisoners, particularly in regards to seemingly foreign sex offenders and knife criminals. Who knows? They might either be just mistakenly released or let out early under the prison release scheme because they've got to make more room for thought criminals. But at the end of the day, it's good that people are getting sent down for this. Then we have Glenn Swanson, was already serving a jail term for child sexual offences, but then another thing came forward. On the 22nd of September, the 63-year-old was sentenced to 18 years imprisonment at Maidstone. That's the Crown Court. He will serve this in addition to his custodial term. So we can assume again that he is likely to die in prison because he was already serving a jail term for child sex offences. Notice he'd already gone to jail for this crime, ladies and gentlemen, which is another key difference as to why many people are so aggrieved over what's been allowed to happen to British girls at the hands of Pakistani men, predominantly Pakistani Muslim men, and that is the fact that many of them never faced a jail cell, and in fact many of the police often cooperated with them to aid in the abuse of the girls as well. George Payne Woodham subjected a child to sexual abuse over several years. The 21-year-old was convicted after a trial and sentenced to 16 years imprisonment at Maidstone Crown Court on Friday the 12th of September. He will serve an additional 4 years on licence under the terms of an extended sentence. Lee Balchin, this is the last one we have on here because the others were online offences, was found guilty of regularly plying a child with alcohol and drugs to render them nearly unconscious before raping them. The 55-year-old was sentenced at Maidstone Crown Court to 15 years imprisonment on Monday, the 13th of October, 2025. Particularly heinous, that one. Thank God all of these disgusting criminals were put away. Society is a lot better off for it. I'm going to wipe my glasses a minute, ladies and gentlemen. There's a big smudge that's doing my head in, and I can barely read off my laptop here. Okay, so those are the physical abuse cases, according to Kent Police. The others here, then, are online abuse cases. So Lucifer Hunter, honestly, if you're going to name your kid that, your parents already hate you. You didn't get a very good start in life, did you? Unless, obviously, he changed his name by Deepole or something like that, or Deepole. Was found guilty of pretending to be a 16-year-old boy to groom 4 young victims on social media. The 24-year-old was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment at Canterbury Crown Court on 17th of October and has been made the subject of a sexual harm prevention order for 15 years. So parents, obviously that is the law, your notice basically to make sure you keep an eye on your kids' devices and make sure you keep an eye on who they're talking to, especially in today's age. You don't know who they're talking to, and anybody can pretend to be anybody, especially with, God knows what's going to be happening and how these people are going to use like AI tools and stuff like that. So please make sure you are being vigilant. And trust me, I hated what I perceived to be helicopter parenting when I was a kid, but I see the value of it now, and I see why now, especially in the technological age. It's not the latchkey age anymore, where you can go to bed and leave your doors unlocked and everything like that in most places. It's not like that anymore, but now obviously you have to deal with cyber threats. So make sure you keep an eye on your children's devices. Kevin Scarnell used dating and social media apps to bombard what he believed to be a teenage boy daily with sexually explicit messages and arranged to meet him for sex. He was sentenced at Maidstone Crown Court on 16th of October to 2 years and 8 months imprisonment. Many could argue it's not long enough. And finally, Andrew Cullis was found to be in possession of a USB containing explicit images of children during a routine sex offender management check in February 2025. So obviously this guy was already known. He has been sentenced to 2 years and 4 months imprisonment at Maidstone Crown Court on 17th of October. So that's the breakdown of what has actually happened in this case. We have a mix here of conviction for crimes that have happened in the past, which is good. Don't believe crimes like this, such as child rape, should ever have anything like a statute of limitations or anything like that. It's impossible for those children who, I'm not sure how old some of them would be in their if they were children at the time, some of them potentially in their 50s or 60s now, they've had to carry that through their entire life. They can never undo that and have that undone. They've just got to find ways to come to terms with it. It's not like you've been defrauded of money, which then you can eventually earn back, for example, even though you could have been defrauded out of it by a scumbag or something like that. There should be no statute of limitations for these crimes. So it's good that they've gone down. It's good that they've gone down. And it does set, in my opinion, some pretty good precedents in ways that I don't think the left are necessarily going to like in many instances. Because one of the biggest sets of evidence that they used coming from these brave victims that came forward, right, pardon me, was witness testimony, or victim testimony. Sorry, victim testimony, no witness testimony. Well, I suppose you could say they are witness to their own crime as well. Victim testimonies and statements were the main source of evidence that was submitted in support. So, first things to ask, ladies and gentlemen, when we're trying to make comparisons, first off, that this was not a group of people working together to systematically abuse young girls or young boys for whatever sex the victims were, doesn't really matter, right? For racially and religious reasons. And it doesn't seem that the community covered for them or anything like that. It just assumes that the crimes went unnoticed, whether they, as we said in the second episode, in the second perpetrator, they intimidated the victims into silence, right? Regardless of what reason it was, whether the crimes just went unknown and unprosecuted. This wasn't these people working systematically hand in hand with each other. These are 8 isolated cases, and it's important to present them as such if we want it to be factual, right? So there's no instance of these people working together to take advantage. Seems to be predominantly young boys together. Okay, that doesn't seem to be what was going on. Now, another thing that we need to go over is some of these are historical cases. Right, and this actually sets, in my opinion, a pretty good precedent. So Roy Humphreys, as we mentioned, was sentenced to 22 years for abusing 3 boys, 2 in the 1970s and another in the 2000s. And again, if we have a look, because I don't believe in any of these cases, especially in the historical ones, there's not going to be any physical evidence that lays around for this long, right? So what was actually used and is seen as credible enough to result in conviction was victim testimony and statements. So, for example, Roy Humphreys, the case relied on testimonies from 3 victims who came forward recently. They detailed accounts of the abuse over decades were presented at trial, leading to a guilty verdict. No physical evidence was mentioned, highlighting the sufficiency of survivor statements in historic prosecutions. Now, if you're wondering, if I can't help but think, ladies and gentlemen, I'm like lisping a little bit. And that's because I was eating some food the other day and I chomped down really hard on the inside of my mouth. So it's actually kind of painful to talk at the moment, especially because as I talk, my teeth are actually scratching on the one bit of the inside of the lip on this side here where the wound is. And it hasn't fully healed yet. It's actually extremely painful, extremely sensitive. So if I look and if I'm sounding a little bit off, please bear with me. Please bear with me. Now, Stephen Riley. Initiated by a victim's report in January of 2025, the conviction stemmed from the survivor's testimony about multiple offences over many years. This was deemed credible by the jury after a full trial. And then in Glenn Swanson's case, a new victim's statement reported while Swanson was already in prison for prior similar crimes formed the basis for the additional conviction. This demonstrates how fresh disclosures can revive and substantiate historic cases. In Payne Woodham's case, the 21-year-old, the victim's disclosure to a school worker in September 2024 triggered the investigation. Her testimony at trial detailing the grooming and assaults was key to a guilty verdict on all charges. And finally, in Balchin's case, the one who was drugging and raping children between the ages of 12 and 15. The victim's 2023 report led to charges. Testimony about the abuse, including forced drug and alcohol consumption, injections, which were believed to be heroin, and rapes in remote locations, were sufficient for conviction at trial. While medical or toxicological evidence could theoretically corroborate drug use, none was explicitly cited in the reports. So I'm not sure when this actually happened. This Victims 2023 reports. Obviously, a lot of drugs, they don't necessarily last in your system for that long, depending on what the substance is itself, and especially if it's repeated. I suppose the symptoms get a little bit, you get used to the symptoms, and as a result, then that's why people need more of the dose, right? As they get used to a certain dose, and it doesn't either hit them as high, or the symptoms are a little bit less, they're more tolerant of it, got to go up even more. In terms of how long these drugs would remain in their system, depending on when he was caught, and depending on how long it'd been since like the last assault or whatever, you might not be able to get the actual toxicological, there we go, toxicological evidence. So what we're seeing here, ladies and gentlemen, is in this instance, the victim testimony was sufficient to result in conviction. And obviously, provided it's true, provided it's not a false testimony, nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. Different in cases where it's been false accusations and people have been convicted and had their livelihoods and their entire lives in many instances taken away from them on false accusations, right? These are true. If this is true and these things did happen, then it's good that they were believed and the perpetrators were sent down. Well, that sets a pretty good precedent, doesn't it, ladies and gentlemen, for historical cases of abuse where victim testimonies were not taken as serious, where victim testimonies were not seen as sufficient evidence. We saw many instances of that in the example of the Syrian refugee, Jamal, I believe his name is, where you had many of the people within the school testifying to being abused by him. The one girl saying that he'd assaulted her with a hockey stick, right? And the judge threw it out. The judge threw it out, basically said they were all lying, and convicted Tommy Robinson in that case, because obviously he revealed the documentary, of essentially lying, even though there was plenty of other evidence in there as well. There was the undercover recordings of the headmaster, undercover recordings of, I believe it was a Huddersfield council official or the social worker that worked with Jamal. There was all of this other evidence, and it was still thrown out. But yet in these instances, and I'm not complaining about this, people will try and clip this probably if it does end up going viral or whatever, or it'll come back to haunt me later on and say, oh, look, he defended pedophiles or whatever. Not the case. Not the case. But it is important to note that in this instance, that victim testimony was enough to result in conviction. So I was on victim testimony enough to result in many other convictions. Why were the victims dismissed? Why were in many instances the victims of the rape gangs prosecuted and seen as criminals themselves? But we got a good bit of good news here from this, ladies and gentlemen. This sets a pretty good precedent, doesn't it? I would imagine there'll be a lot of historical cases of those grooming gangs we can go back to now, because gives some victim testimony. We could probably get some pretty good convictions, can't we? I think that's how we should be pursuing this. Obviously, we know we have a woke judiciary. We know it's two-tier, but the precedent has now been set that all you need, well, I don't even know if it is a precedent, really. I'm not a legal expert, I'm not saying that, but it does seem to me that in this instance now, when we've seen that so many victims were let down because they were not believed, because their testimonies were not taken forward, despite other evidence, mind you, despite the fact that there's so much other evidence at play in here as well, DNA evidence, witness testimony, all of these other things, testimony from family members, all of this stuff, actual physical damages to the girls, some of whom can't have children in the future now, and all of these other things, right? Some of the children who are not here anymore, because they were ground into kebab meat and murdered. All right? We now have a very good case, if we didn't have a good case anyway, simply based on their victim testimony, to go and throw a hell of a lot of people in fucking prison. Or send them on the next flight home and tell them they'll be met with a relatively inexpensive, very fast-moving bit of metal if they were ever to return. Right? Or maybe what we can do, and at this moment in time, I am not in favor of this purely because I don't think the current state that we have should have the power to legislate this, because they will use it for political reasons. So things that I've always been on the fence about, I've always changed my positions on the death penalty, because again, do we want to give the state that kind of power in some instances? I'm not in favor of it with this government, I can promise you that. Just the way that it is, how woke it is, it'll just be, an excuse to write off death warrants like they did in the Soviet Union, if we were to do that now. But maybe in a moral and just society for people, maybe we could actually exercise a bit of justice her own justice and a little bit of, I don't know, what some of the feminists would probably call toxic masculinity and all of these things, and actually administer some permanent justice. Actually make some examples of these people that have come over here, have done heinous things to our girls in the name of racial and religious supremacy. Maybe we should show them that we're not about that. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, in many instances, remigration is going to be a kindness. It's going to be too kind for some. Remigration is going to be too kind for some, particularly in the case, for example, of this young girl. She's a grooming gang victim in Scotland who's going by the name of Taylor. And Charlie Peters recently sat down to interview her about her experiences and how she was groomed by, again, gangs of Pakistani men. The quote from GB News on the post, which you can find down below, and we'll play a section of the video, but we won't play it all because it's about 4 minutes long. It made me sick to my stomach. The police are supposed to care about you. They didn't even ask questions. There were so many failings in this, but she revealed that the police missed many opportunities to investigate her abusers. Here's just a small section of that video for you, ladies and gentlemen. I urge you to go and watch the full video down below.
And it never.
Taylor's records reveal that at one point, her name appeared in a CSE investigation and that the police visited her unit, but they failed to properly investigate.
No police officer ever asked to speak to me regarding the sex exploitation claim that they came to the unit with. I wasn't aware that anybody had even visited.
Taylor's testimony comes as debate swirls in Scottish politics around an inquiry into grooming gangs in the country. The Conservatives put forward an amendment that would have required research into group-based child sexual exploitation, but it was voted down by the SNP and the Greens. The Scottish Justice Secretary Angela Constance argued that there were no current police investigations into grooming gangs similar to the pattern exposed in many towns in England, where predominantly Pakistani men have targeted vulnerable white children.
Not only was she groomed, there were many instances where the police could have stopped it. But not only that, the councillors in particular, was it Scottish Labour or the SNP and the Greens in particular, they voted it down. They voted any kind of national inquiry down. And that's another difference you're seeing here, ladies and gentlemen, is it didn't seem to be any impediment. Once the evidence was brought forward in the case of the Kent child sexual exploitation, there was no worries about racism. There was no worries about any kind of other religious discrimination. There was no calls that this is, anti-white or anti-British or anything like that, like we've seen in many other instances, right? We've seen that calling, the grooming gangs for what they are, which is racially and religiously motivated, is not only racist, but quote-unquote Islamophobic, right? It's another big difference between what you saw here in the Kent case and what you see hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times up and down England, Scotland, Wales, no doubt Ireland have them as well. And our politicians are all too eager to try and pander to them. This is what we're saying. It's like it's one of the largest child sacrifice pagan rituals I've ever seen, almost. The old artwork of the Canaanites sacrificing their babies to Moloch, that image, right? Go look it up if you want to understand what I mean. It's what they would do in ancient societies, ladies and gentlemen. The thing they would do is they would create this big deity thing, which is have its hands extended out. And what they would do is they would heat this. They would heat the hands of this, deity. This I don't know, like made of bronze or something like that. Something that wouldn't melt, obviously, but that would get equally hot. It's a conductor of heat. And they would put babies on this platform when it was boiling hot enough to tear your skin and burn your skin off your body, right? And the baby would be rolling around and obviously wailing in pain, right? Not having a clue what to do, right? And oftentimes they would actually roll off the hands and into the actual flames themselves, all the while people around it would cheer it on. It's kind of like what we're seeing here is just like not outright burning a child to death, but sacrificing them on the altar of multiculturalism and diversity and political correctness instead. There are so many of these victims, ladies and gentlemen, and this is still going on today. And still, it seems the government is doing everything they can, dragging their heels, kicking and screaming almost, to prosecute some of the worst criminals we've ever seen, purely because they are of a foreign background and have a certain religion you're not allowed to say anything negative about. Here's more examples of this, ladies and gentlemen, from another young lady.
Bree, this grooming gang survivor, calls what happened to her anti-Western religious and racist abuse.
When I was a victim, I was raped multiple times, I was beaten, I was tortured, and throughout all of that, I was constantly being racially abused. There was a constant barrage of, you're a white slag, you're a white whore, you're a fucking gory, which is the Pakistani word for white person. So
it's fine when they do
the
it.
racist abuse was non-stop. The religious abuse is real. Like, I was taught it as a type of othering. Like, our Pakistani girls are good and pure, and they cover themselves, they're virgins till they're married. But white girls are trash, they're whores, they all sleep with hundreds of men, they're all worthless. I don't think.
Many of those girls they abused, mind you, ladies and gentlemen, are, some of them as young as 11 years old, from what I've read, right? More, sort of ranging between about 12 and 14, usually in most of the cases that I've seen. And they apparently slept with hundreds of men. No, in these instances, ladies and gentlemen, they've been forced to. They've been raped by tens or hundreds of men. Tens or hundreds of men, the very same men that are scolding her for supposedly being a white slag, or whatever the term she used to describe a white person, the way that the Pakistanis, describe white people, the term that she used. It's fine when they do it. It's fine when they make you feel othered, ladies and gentlemen. It's fine when they make our young girls feel othered. But God forbid you make them feel othered. Or you'll be hauled in front of HR, or you'll be fast-tracked in front of the courts. They can only make us feel othered in our own country, or in our own countries. They then have free reign to do whatever they want to our young girls, and all the while the people that object to it, the people that try and highlight the racial and religious motivations and the fact that this is part of a broader anti-Western conquest, they are obviously the real bad guys. They are obviously the real bigots. Take note of everyone, ladies and gentlemen, every single person trying to equivocate between what you saw in Kent and the, not only the historical, but the still growing on right now, systematic grooming and raping and torturing our young girls for racial and religious reasons. Both are evil. Both cases are evil, right? All cases of any child sexual exploitation and abuse is evil. All cases are evil, rather. That goes without saying. But it's not the same. The motivations are not the same. The methods and the community involvement are not the same. Our standards of morality and us as peoples and how we see the world are not the same. And like oil and water, some were never meant to mix. If you enjoyed that clip, then make sure to go on over to the Voice of the Valleys X page at VOT_Valleys on X. We're also on Instagram at Voice of the Valleys. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Godspeed.